right, thank you very much, Ashley, and welcome everybody. It's certainly good to be able to present to everyone, keeping our social distance here, and I'm glad to see a number of my friends, including Howard Berman, my old law school classmate, joining us from Virginia, and some of my other friends who are on the line as well, and people that are not my friends just yet, but I'm certainly glad that you're joining us. Our topic today is eco-thrillers, and it coincides, of course, with Earth Day. Let me just go through a few preliminaries, and then we'll jump right into the program. And I've been asked to do a brief reading from my book, Drink to Every Beast. And oh, there's a picture of Drink to Every Beast. So there it is, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And right now, today, while we're on the live version of the program, my publisher, Headline Books, is presenting a very great opportunity for you. If you order the book now, you go to the Headline Books website and order the book, we will arrange it so that I will actually sign it for you right here online, and then sign it for you any way that you want, and then they will send you the book, and they will not be charging you for any shipping costs. So it's a neat thing. I've done it before several times now with others who bought the book, and it's been fun for the people who bought the book and for me to be able to do a signing, even though we're separated by quite some distance. If you want the course materials, some of them, not all of them yet, are up on my blog. What you're going to be looking for at my website is you go to joelburcat.com, the blog page, and you're going to be looking for the materials called Environmental Fiction. There will also be a list of thrillers. There's a partial list in that first post that's up, the one that's up right now. Hopefully by tonight, both of the revised posts will be up. If you can go back and take a look, or if you're watching the video of this down the road, they'll both be up on the website, and you can see the outline for today's program, as well as a suggested list of environmental thrillers. So since it is Earth Day today, and the 50th anniversary of Earth Day today, I just thought for a minute we would just give a word about Earth Day and go back to the old terminology that was used back then and have a brief teach-in. So Earth Day was the brainchild of Gaylord Nelson, who was a senator from Wisconsin, Democratic senator from Wisconsin. And he noted that he hoped to provide that there would be grassroots environmental movement, and that it would increase environmental awareness. That, of course, occurred back in 1970, 50 years ago today. And he said that the objective was to get a nationwide demonstration of concern for the environment so large that it would shake the political establishment out of its lethargy and finally force this issue permanently onto the national political agenda. Keep in mind, he said this back in the early part of 1970. In late 1970, Richard Nixon signed into law the law that created the Environmental Protection Agency. After that, we had the Endangered Species Act, and after that, the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, Superfund law, many, many other laws that came into existence in the 1970s and 1980s as well. And I'm going to say, in large measure, sparked by the environmental consciousness that was growing at that point in time. This was not a Democrat or Republican issue. Of course, Senator Nelson was a Democrat, but speakers at the first Earth Day events in New York and in Philadelphia included Senate Minority Leader Hugh Scott, a Republican from Pennsylvania, and Jacob Javits, a Republican from New York. And like I said later on, President Nixon, Republican president, signed into law the bill that established the Environmental Protection Agency. So let's get right into our topic here and talk about eco-thrillers, and maybe I'll unshare that for a second. So we're going to talk about eco-thrillers today, and this is near and dear to my heart. You know, when I started writing, and I started writing the genre that I like, which is environmental legal thrillers, I of course did a lot of reading, and I'd already been doing a lot of reading about the environment, and in particular fiction related to the environment. And I kept hearing about, oh, this book's an eco-thriller and that book's an eco-thriller. And one of the things that I was wondering about was, you know, I heard references to books like The Monkey Wrench Gang being called an eco-thriller, and Zoo being called an eco-thriller, and Jurassic Park being called an eco-thriller, and The Pelican Brief being called an eco-thriller. And my initial thought was, these books aren't remotely alike. There's nothing similar about them. They're very, very different kinds of books, yet they're all being called eco-thrillers. And I thought there's something wrong with that designation, because a book about, dinosaurs being brought back to life, or all of the animals in the world, rebelling against mankind, or a brief that was written by a law student dealing with the bayous of Louisiana, or a group of environmental activists or environmental terrorists, whatever you want to call them, in the American West. How could they all be the same genre? It didn't seem to me that they were the same genre, yet they're all being referred to as eco-thrillers. Back to this. So what occurred to me ultimately was that the books all have a similarity in terms of the setting. The environment is a big part of all of those books, whether it is a book about climate, whether it's a book about the Amazon, whether it's a book about a brief being written to the United States Supreme Court. They all have the environment as a critical key component of the story. And even to a certain extent, the environment may become sort of a character in the story. Sorry, we're having a little technical difficulty here. There we go. So there's a classic example that's often referred to as when people are talking about the environment being a critical component of a story. And that is Jack London's short story, To Build a Fire. And I loved Jack London. I read a lot of Jack London when I was younger. This one always stuck with me, and it sticks with a lot of other people as well, because there's only one person in that story. And he's not even named. He's just referred to as the man. And yet the environment is not only the setting of the story, it's also the antagonist in the story. And it creates probably one of the first and earliest examples of a terrific opportunity of seeing how the environment is used in the story. And you can see, this is just the first opening sentences of the story. Day dawned cold and gray when the man turned aside from the main Yukon Trail. He climbed the high earth bank where a little traveled trail led east through the pine forest, and so on. And you start getting a sense of this harsh environment, 50 below zero. And he's freezing to death. And even his dog has abandoned him, but he's freezing to death and he has to build a fire. He's completely inept. Things don't turn out well for him. But the environment is a key component of that story. And the environment is a key component of all of the stories that are loosely referred to as eco-thrillers. So as I pointed out, here are some that are all referred to, if you read any criticisms or any book reviews, you'll often see all of these books referred to as eco-thrillers. And you have to say to yourself, I don't understand, because it doesn't seem to make any sense, because these books, other than the fact that the environment is an important factor in the story, there's nothing that really binds them. So before we even jump into this too far, let me ask, so what? What difference does it make if these books are all called eco-thrillers? And I think it does make a difference. It makes a difference because, first of all, readers who are looking for a certain kind of book may be anticipating that a book called an eco-thriller is going to be a certain kind of book. And yet, I've been able to identify at least 4 different kinds of books that fall under that genre, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And so it may be confusing to readers who are looking for a certain kind of book and expecting something. And secondly, it's just plain lazy, I think, for reviewers to refer to them as eco-thrillers, because they're so different, and how can you lump them all together? So what are the 4 different kinds of books that I've identified? We're going to call it the traditional kind of book, Zoo, Jurassic Park, Relic by Preston and Child. We're going to call them eco-thrillers. That's the traditional book. We'll talk about them in a minute. Then you've got your environmental thrillers. These are realistic stories that are not based in science fiction or horror, which the others are, but these are based on realistic settings and realistic things happening to realistic people. Next would be environmental legal thrillers, where lawyers and legal process is involved, usually where some sort of justice is trying to be determined by the protagonist, the hero of the story. And then finally, the newest of all of the books, what's known as cli-fi, and that's not my designation, but that's what the latest thrillers in dealing with climate change are called. So let's talk about eco-thrillers for a second. So again, the key component is the environment is the setting. There's usually a catastrophe or calamity that will or has occurred, and our hero has to stop the catastrophe from occurring or put the genie back in the bottle somehow. The key to these books is that there's an element of science fiction or horror to all of them. So here are three examples. You've got Michael Creighton's terrific book, Jurassic Park, and of course they made a terrific movie from that. And of course, in Jurassic Park, you have the misguided scientists and entrepreneurs who decide that what they're going to do is they're going to recreate dinosaurs, and then they're going to have a theme park based on that, and they're going to invite people to come and visit this theme park inhabited by every kind of dinosaur known to man that they can recreate. What could possibly go wrong? And of course, as we all know, because we've read the book or we've seen the movie, everything goes wrong. And our protagonist, which includes children, by the way, in that story, they have to try to put the genie back into the bottle. Really a good example of an eco-thriller. Another one that, if you're not familiar with Preston and Child, you should be. They've written together quite a few terrific books. They wrote a book called Relic, and then they wrote a sequel called Reliquarium about a group of well-meaning anthropologists. Some of these books, by the way, start out with well-meaning paleontologists, scientists, well-meaning anthropologists. They bring back a monster accidentally from the Amazon rainforest and bring it to the New York Academy of Sciences. And what could possibly go wrong? Now, they don't realize, of course, that they brought back a monster, but he develops a taste for patrons of the museum. And it's a very, very scary book, really mixes both the environmental as well as the horror aspects. It's a very, very, it's a page turner. It's hard to put it down. But again, another book that I would put in the eco-thriller genre. And then the last one I'll mention right now is Zoo by James Patterson and Michael Ludwig. Zoo, you may have seen the, I'm going to say not so great television version of Zoo. The book itself I thought was excellent. But again, where you have scientists who are messing around with animals, and as a result of that, all the animals of the world turn against man, and as a result of that, it creates a situation that is out of control. So again, you have the science fiction aspect, almost the horror aspect of it, which puts it firmly in the eco-thriller camp. There are other books that I say are eco-thrillers, and when it's finally up on my site, you can go and take a look at what they are. Cat's Cradle is one of the earliest ones. Jaws is another one, where of course the great white shark develops a sweet tooth for human beings. Relic, Reliquary, and Zoo are the ones that I've at least identified for you right now. And of course, there are dozens more like them. Now we move on to environmental thrillers. So how is an environmental thriller different from an eco-thriller? So the main difference is it's a realistic scenario. So unlike eco-thrillers that are based in science fiction or based in horror, an environmental thriller, to distinguish it from an eco-thriller, has a more realistic base. And it's, I'm going to say, regular people who are challenged by, I'm going to say most often, evil government people or evil corporate people who are greedy or power hungry, and they are messing something up, and the hero of the story is trying to resolve that problem and trying to fix that problem, despite the efforts of the greedy corporation or the evil government person. So it's an us versus them kind of scenario in those stories. Otherwise, very similar. In the other components, the environment's a setting. There's a man-made calamity that's going to occur, has occurred, and the hero has to stop the calamity from occurring. So here are three examples, and there are more. I'll mention them again in a minute. And I have a list that, if it's not up there yet, will be up there hopefully later today. The oldest of all of these books, and the one I read it again not too long ago just to see if it was still fresh, and it is The Monkey Wrench Gang by Edward Abbey. That's probably the granddaddy of this genre. I'm not familiar with any that come from before this point in time. And in The Monkey Wrench Gang, you have a group of people who are dedicated to the environment. They slip from being dedicated environmentalists to eco activists to eco-terrorists in the story. And their desire is to try to undo some of the development and damage that they see in the American West. Classic story of us versus them, and really a well-written story worth looking at again. But again, no science fiction, no horror in that book. Next is a book by John McGoran called Drift. He's written 3 books in that series. And Drift is a story about a Philadelphia cop who ends up going on an unpaid vacation to the country. He's forced to go because of some problems that he had back in Philly. He ends up in this house, his family's house in the countryside, and there he encounters drug dealers, he encounters greedy developers, and he encounters greedy agribusiness people who manage to create some environmental calamity that he has to try to undo if he can. Great story, by the way. John is a terrific writer, and the 3 books in this series are terrific. And the third one I'm going to mention right now is Oil and Water by Pam Lazos. Pam, by the way, is a lawyer at the Environmental Protection Agency in Philadelphia and also a writer. And in her story, Oil and Water, also set in the Philadelphia area, you have some teenagers who create a device that can turn garbage into oil. So there is a little science fiction element to it, although I understand that there's actually scientific basis for this, and there are scientists actually working on processes like that. So maybe this is more speculative fiction than science fiction. That's the only component of it, though, that's in the science fiction realm. But the story involves the effort by corporations to try to get the device either by hook or by crook. And there's a lot of description in there about oil spills in the Delaware River and about other environmental calamities that take place. An interesting tale by Pam, and again, another book that I would recommend. There are a number of other books in this genre. It's a growing genre. One of my favorites, by the way, one of my favorite authors is Carl Heisen, who writes a lot about Florida. And he wrote a book in 1986 called Tourist Season. And that's a great book. Same kind of situation and scenario. You have developers who are trying to develop the Everglades, and his hero is involved in the middle of all of that, trying to stop the people from doing the evil doing that they're doing. The Fracking War by Michael Fitzgerald. Dead Out is the second book in John McGoran's series. Dust Up is the third book in John's series, and a recent book by Anita Halverson called The Dirty Network, dealing actually with climate change. Now, I put the book, The Dirty Network, in this category of environmental thrillers rather than in cli-fi, because it's not science fiction-y. It's really more environmental thriller than science fiction. So I know I've seen her book already described as being cli-fi, but I don't think, at least in terms of what I consider to be cli-fi, that it falls into that category. Again, all of these will be up on my website. If they're not up now, they'll be up hopefully before the end of the day. So then you move on to the third genre, and we're really sort of taking these in the order in which they have started appearing in the publishing world. So environmental legal thrillers. And again, similar to the others, environment is as setting is a very, very important component of these books. There's a man-made calamity that that has occurred or that will occur. Our hero is, in this case, a lawyer who must resolve a legal case of some kind or resolve an investigation or bring justice to prevent the calamity from occurring again. And it's a very realistic scenario like the environmental thrillers, and it also involves courtrooms and investigations. So that's a different and additional component from the environmental thrillers that don't generally involve courtrooms and investigations. So here are some examples of that. One of the earliest is John Grisham's book, The Pelican Brief, in which, in classic John Grisham style, you have two Supreme Court justices who were assassinated right in the early pages of the book. And the next thing that you know is that we start to figure out that there's something going on in the bayou in Louisiana, and some law student has written a brief to the US Supreme Court, and that law student's life is in danger as a result of taking the lead in that, what's known as the Pelican Brief. Great story, great tale, and really one of the earliest in the environmental legal thriller genre. The next book, and I know somebody's going to call me on it, so I'll jump out first, is A Civil Action by Jonathan Harr. Now, civil action is not fiction, it's nonfiction. And actually on my list, I have two other things that are nonfiction, both the movie Erin Brockovich, as well as the recent movie Dark Waters, both of which, all three of which are actually nonfiction works. But the reason I'm including them is because they read like thrillers. These are books that, even though they deal with real scenarios, things that really occurred, they're an effort to try to present to the public these realistic scenarios, these real things that occurred, and present to the public the lawyers and the investigators who worked on trying to resolve these problems. But they really read like thrillers. So I mentioned that here, and it's certainly worth it. If you haven't read the book or seen the movie, it's worth it to read or see A Civil Action. And the third book I'll mention right now is Mine, Drink to Every Beast, a book in which there's a real environmental calamity, actually based on a realistic scenario, dumping in the river, Susquehanna River in this case, and two teenagers who were killed as a result of that. And a young lawyer, Mike Jacobs, has to try to investigate this and stop the dumping before the dumpers can kill again. So realistic scenario, realistic in terms of what an investigation is like, an environmental investigation is like, and obviously something that is an ongoing scenario that can occur today. On my website, I try to put up, and actually on my Facebook page also, I try to put up whenever I see about another dumping case, I try to put that up. And because this kind of thing goes on till today, it's been forever that it's been going on. I've written two other books. One is currently over at Headline Books, and hopefully that'll be coming out this fall. That's called Amid Rage, and that deals with the surface mine permit battle. And then the third book I've written, which is currently with my editor, is called Strange Fire, dealing with a fracking case. So these cases, these books tend to be very, very realistic based and deal with realistic scenarios. Some other environmental legal thrillers that you might be interested in would be The Appeal by John Grisham, another book about an environmental case. Gray Mountain, another Grisham book dealing with a mining case, a mining case in Western Virginia as opposed to West Virginia. And there are other books in this genre, not that many, but to me, these are really exciting books to read as an environmental lawyer. The fourth and final genre that I'm going to talk about is cli-fi. Now, cli-fi, by definition, has science fiction elements to it. And I wasn't the person who came up with this, so don't blame me for the dad joke. But cli-fi is like sci-fi, and it's very clever because the two of them are interrelated. And in these books, again, the environment is the setting, but particularly climate issues is the setting in these books. And there's a catastrophe or calamity that will or has occurred, and the hero has to stop it from occurring or put the genie back in the bottle, as in the other stories. And this one, very often, I'm going to say most often, does contain science fiction elements. So I've highlighted for you three books. Michael Creighton's book, State of Fear. This is one of the earlier ones, actually. Creighton wrote this back in 2004 about a group of environmental terrorists, eco-terrorists, who are going to try to manipulate the environment and the climate for their evil gain. And our main character is to try to stop that from occurring. It's interesting because Creighton ultimately was a climate change denier, but he wrote this book, which is really quite an exciting book. First book I think I've ever seen. It's a novel that is extensively footnoted. He uses them as endnotes, just hundreds and hundreds of endnotes discussing where he got the information from his book, for his book, to show the realistic aspects of it. But it's also very much a science fiction book. Barbara Kingsolver's book, Flight Behavior, is a highly renowned book, as is Annie Proulx's Barkskins. Barbara Kingsolver's book is about the climate having an impact on monarch butterflies. It's about many, many other things, as Barbara Kingsolver's books tend to be, but at least superficially, it's very much a book about environmental degradation as a result of climate change, and certainly well worth the read. An excellent, excellent book. Annie Proulx's book, Barkskins, is a good book, difficult to get through, but it takes a long view. It starts out in the early days of a family that is intruding on Native American lands, and ultimately takes over the land and ultimately destroys the forest that is sustaining them. And it's very much about the impact ultimately of climate change on their lives, and certainly also on the lives of and the descendants' lives, the lives of Native Americans. So the conclusion for all of this is, there are different kinds of environmental thrillers, and I think it's really lazy to call them all eco-thrillers, although it's certainly easier to say eco-thriller than anything else. Some are science fiction and horror-based, like eco-thrillers. Some are reality-based, like environmental thrillers. Some are lawyer-based, like environmental legal thrillers. And some are climate change-based, and I would have to add science fiction-based, the Cli-Fi books. Now, like I said, I've been asked to read a little bit from my story, Drink to Every Beast, and I'm going to do that right now. This book, like I said, is available for you right now if you'd like to buy a copy of it, and I will autograph it for you right here, and then we will send it to you. You'll get it in a couple of days. So this is from my book, Drink to Every Beast. Enrique Vallejo was an unlikely executioner. He was the kind of man who would sooner catch a bug in his house and toss it outside than smash it. He didn't own a gun and had never raised a hand against anyone. No one would have guessed the profession of the short and dark-complected man in the plain blue coveralls with a patch over his pocket that read, Ricky. He did not have a menacing appearance, and there was nothing sinister about him. In fact, he was rather ordinary. Quiet and restrained, he would have been angry if someone had accused him of cruelty. The last man one would expect to pull the switch, coldly, without malice or a second thought, was about to do so. Vallejo fixed the hose from the old oil tanker directly into the opening of the borehole. As he worked, he wiped the sweat from his forehead onto his sleeve, made a few adjustments to the controls of his rig, and after glancing around, pulled the lever. 4,500 gallons of venomous black sludge, phenol, waste oil, TCE, TCA, benzene, PCBs, and some water mixed in for good measure, spewed into the borehole. The shaft had been shored up with an iron casing that was cemented into the unconsolidated gravel, coal mine waste, and fill near the surface. The brew poured into the cased opening, down past the man-made rubble, and below the entombed topsoil and subsoil. The short casing gave out at 20 feet as the shaft itself continued past strata of ancient, packed metamorphic rock. As the black excreta vanished, it would return momentarily as if the mouth of the earth was stifling back vomit, until it found a fracture in the rock and spread laterally away from the well. with continuous pressure pushing the liquid through the hose and gravity pulling it toward the depths of the earth, it continued surging down the borehole. At a depth of 75 feet, now in solid bedrock, the waste flowed past tiny fingers of anthracite coal, too thin and fractured ever to have been mined. Down and down it streamed, past contorted strata of shale, anthracite, and sandstone bedrock, in layers that were as wrinkled as the fat on Big Bill McClatchy's neck. As the truck drained, Vallejo stood 20 paces away and lit a match, repeatedly puffing on the lucky strike, annoyed that the match would not readily cooperate with his efforts to light the cigarette. At nearly 250 feet below the surface of the ground, had anyone been there to observe it, and had there been any light to see it, one would have seen the poison as it spewed out of the borehole and splattered into the remains of the lateral workings of the old Excelsior No. 12 mine. Excelsior had quit mining in this vicinity in 1954, over a half-century earlier, when the surface was still mostly poor farmland, and the miners labored with shovels and pickaxes deep underground for the precious anthracite coal. An Irish mine foreman named Gallagher decided his men needed an air shaft. A surface crew drilled the 3-inch opening to ensure that the poor souls who toiled in the mine had a semblance of fresh air nearly a mile from the main shaft. Gallagher's selfless efforts for his men were thus rewarded. While Vallejo tried to decide whether he could first pay his outstanding MasterCard bill or his electric bill, the liquid splashed from the air vent borehole into the old workings, joining the stream of putrid water that trickled through the remains of the No. 12 shaft. At one time, the horizontal shaft was nearly 4 feet high, tall enough that a man could walk hunched over in a perpetual state of kyphosis. Or, if he were lucky, he could ride on one of the mule-drawn rail cars that brought men into the mine and moved the coal out. Since the mine had closed, however, after years of cave-ins, if anyone were insane enough to enter the workings today, he would hardly find a location more than 3 feet high anywhere. The ceiling had so thoroughly collapsed in places that only sewage and chemical wastewater could work its way through the collapsed shaft, roof rock, and rotten support timbers. The old miners at No. 12 knew how to dig a mine shaft, so this one was tilted ever so slightly to allow any water that entered the mine to drain out. Now, nearly a century after the tunnel had been constructed and a half-century after it was abandoned, the old mine continued gravity draining toward the Susquehanna River near Pittston, exactly as the clever Welsh mine engineers had planned. The slug of toxic water flowed as though in a sewer pipe, which in a sense it was, until it met the main shaft of the Excelsior mine, nearly 10 feet high, until it too had subsided. This passageway contained the combined wastewaters of dozens of mine shafts, all abandoned after the catastrophic Knox mine disaster in 1959. The Blue Danube this was not, were it not for the severe drought the region endured that summer. The mine tunnel would have been filled with a considerable current of mostly groundwater. The 4,500 gallons from the tanker, however, made up most of the volume of the flow on this September morning. The stinking mess of water in the tunnel contained brown shitwater, used condoms, ground waste, garbage disposals, bloody waters from doctors' offices and medical facilities, overflows from leaking sewers, coal residue that converted into sulfuric acid, oil and crud from hundreds of French drains and garages and basements where the workers and homeowners did not think twice about disposing their used oil, industrial cleaning wastes, direct discharges from hundreds of houses whose residents were grateful to have never paid for sewer service, and now 4,500 gallons of toxic waste from the small industrial operation in North Jersey, whose owner had paid Bayonne Trucking and Cartage Company the cut rate price of $75 per gallon to dispose of this contaminated swill, no questions asked. Bayonne Trucking threw in the phony state and federal paperwork brought us. So I wanted you to just get a sense of that's a really interesting chapter based on a realistic scenario, a mine shaft in the Pittston area in Pennsylvania back in the 1970s that was used this way. There was a real case where this occurred, and ultimately the perpetrators were brought to justice. but my story is not about them. My story really is about the investigation that takes place. And it is a fictional story, so it's not based on the real story. It's just the, as they say, ripped from the headlines. So it's really just the headlines and nothing more. So if you want to get the outlines that I've been talking about, you want to go to joelburcat.com, go to the blog, and that will take you to the outlines. Hopefully, like I said, I checked just before the program, only one of them was up. There should be another one and a newer version of the first one. They'll be up hopefully later today. And let me wish you and your families good health, and to those who are suffering from any kind of illness or disease, a speedy recovery. And if Ashley is there, and if there are any questions, I'd be delighted to answer your questions. And if you would like me to sign a book, you can use the chat feature, and we can sign your book for you. Ashley, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much, Joel. That was fantastic. We do have a question from Howard. He asks, in writing your books, how do you balance or resist getting too deep into the weeds of Enviro speak with what the non-environmental professional would know?
That's a great question, and I can honestly say that I did not set Howard up to ask me that question. One of the problems with writing a book that deals with certain technical issues is that it's very, very easy to get bogged down in dealing with those technical issues. Now, anybody who's ever read a Tom Clancy novel knows that Mr. Clancy, when he was still alive, when he wrote The Hunt for Red October and then his several follow-on books about Jack Ryan, that those books were just chock full of details, all kinds of things about submarines and boats and weapons, and in excruciating detail. And his readers loved that. And not only that, they were willing to read 600-page books that had all that detail in it. But that's Tom Clancy, and I'm not Tom Clancy. So what I try to do is I try to present the issues in a way that is understandable to people. There's a real balance. And I will say that very often I'll write something and I'll write it out in kind of a technical way, and then I'll rewrite it and I'll rewrite it until I believe that it's something that a layperson would be able to appreciate and understand. Sometimes I'll have lay people who are readers take a look at the text and see what they say. If they think it's too technical, then I'll rewrite it again to try to make it less technical. But at the same time, I think that people, they want to know some of these technical issues. And for example, in my next book, Amid Rage, there's some pretty extensive discussion about coal surface mines. And I go into a lot of detail because I think that readers want to be transported somewhere. So in that case, they're being transported to a strip mine in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. And I think readers want to get the feel of it. They want to feel as though they're in that strip mine. They want to smell the diesel from the vehicles. They want to smell the dust from the rocks. They want to be there, but at the same time, you don't want to overwhelm them. So it is a balance in terms of putting that information into the story, number one, and then number two, making it so that it's generic enough that a lay reader would appreciate it. So there's a balance. And then, of course, there's the Tom Clancy approach, which is just to go head over tails and just go in and give the readers a very, very detailed description. I try not to do that as much as I possibly can. Like I said, I think I'm a decent writer, but I'm not Tom Clancy.
We think you are. All right, there are no more questions in the chat, but if somebody does think of something later and they'd like to ask you, Joel, what's the best way to contact you?
The best way to contact me would be through my website. I know that some of you on the call probably have my my email address, and but otherwise, go to my website. There is a contact page, and that works very, very efficiently. So you go to the website, you go to the contact page, send me your question. I'll be delighted to answer your question for you. So if you do have any questions about these books or questions about the outline or the list that's in the blog, just get in touch with me and I'll be happy to answer those for you.